That night started like any other. My stepmom, Linda, called me down for dinner with an unusually warm smile. She said she'd made my favorite pasta. It felt strange because she never cooked for me, but I didn't want to seem ungrateful. The smell filled the kitchen, creamy and rich, and for a moment I almost forgot how tense things had been between us. When she placed the plate in front of me, I noticed her eyes. They didn't look loving. They looked expectant, like she was waiting for something to happen. She sat across from me, not touching her own food, just watching. My gut twisted. I picked up my fork but paused. She asked, "What's wrong?" "Eat, sweetheart." I forced a smile and said I was just letting it cool. As I moved my fork, I caught a faint white powder clinging to the edge of the sauce. My heart skipped. Maybe it was just cheese, I told myself, but my instincts screamed otherwise. I looked up at her again. She quickly glanced away and picked up her water. Something wasn't right. I stayed calm, pretending not to notice. My dad was away on a work trip, so it was just the two of us. I remembered overhearing her phone call the night before, her whispering something like, "It'll all be over soon." I didn't understand it then, but now every piece started to connect. I asked her about her day, trying to act normal. She relaxed a bit and finally stood up to grab some napkins. My hands were shaking, but I did it fast. I swapped our plates. When she came back, she didn't notice. I smiled, thanked her again, and pushed my plate slightly toward her. "Go ahead," she said, taking a bite from the plate she thought was mine. The room went quiet except for the sound of her chewing. I just watched. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. A few minutes later, her expression changed. She blinked fast, pressing her fingers to her temples. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. She mumbled something I couldn't understand. Then she looked at me, confused and pale. What's happening?" I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm. "I don't know, Linda. Maybe something in the food." Her fork slipped from her hand and clattered onto the table. She stumbled toward the sink, coughing. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the woman who had been smiling at me moments ago. She turned, fear in her eyes. "What did you do?" I looked at her quietly and said, "I think you should ask yourself that." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I didn't feel proud or angry, just cold. She tried to hurt me, and all I did was let her taste her own plan. That night, I realized something about people. Sometimes the ones who act like family are the ones who wish you harm the most. When my dad, Robert Miller, told me he was getting remarried, I tried to be happy for him. He had been lonely since Mom passed away, and I wanted him to smile again. When I met Linda for the first time, she seemed perfect. She had soft curls, a warm voice, and the kind of charm that made everyone around her feel comfortable. My dad looked at her like she had brought light back into his life. I wanted to believe she'd do the same for me. At first, everything felt normal. She brought flowers into the house, rearranged the furniture, and cooked big family dinners. She'd call me sweetheart in front of Dad, ask about school, and tell neighbors how proud she was to have a wonderful stepdaughter. People thought we were a picture-perfect family, but behind closed doors, things were different. When Dad wasn't home, Linda barely spoke to me. Her smile faded, replaced by cold, watchful eyes. She'd sigh when I walked into the room, like I was some unwanted reminder. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking maybe we just needed time to get used to each other. I offered to help around the house, even baked cookies one afternoon, hoping she'd join me. She did, but only to criticize how I was doing everything wrong. She'd correct the smallest things, the way I folded towels, the way I spoke to my dad, even how I set the table. Her words were polite, but her tone wasn't. "Your mom must have spoiled you," she once said quietly while drying dishes. It stung more than I expected. She never mentioned my mom directly again, but I could feel her dislike whenever Dad brought her up. Dad didn't notice. To him, Linda was everything he had wished for, caring, supportive, gentle. She treated him like gold, laughed at his jokes, and always made him feel appreciated. I saw how happy he was, so I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to ruin that for him. But the longer we lived together, the more obvious her resentment became. If Dad hugged me or praised me for something, I'd catch Linda looking at me with that tight, fake smile. She'd quickly change the subject or find a way to make me feel small. "You're growing up so fast," she'd say, her voice sweet but her eyes sharp. Sometimes I caught her staring at my mom's pictures, the ones Dad refused to take down. She'd dust them slowly, her expression unreadable. I could tell she hated that Mom's memory still lived in the house, still lived through me. I wanted to talk to Dad about it, but he was always busy or away for work. And even if I did tell him, what could I say? That the woman he loved couldn't stand me? So I kept pretending. Every smile at the dinner table, every good night, was just another way to keep peace. I didn't know then how deep her resentment really ran, or how far she'd go to make sure I was out of the picture. When my dad got promoted, he started traveling more often. He was excited about it, and I tried to be happy for him, but deep down I knew what it meant. I'd be alone with Linda most of the time. Without Dad around, she didn't bother pretending anymore. The sweet smiles and kind words disappeared the moment his car left the driveway. She began taking control of everything. My room, my clothes, even what I ate. She acted like the house was hers alone, and I was just a guest overstaying my welcome. She stopped washing my clothes by mistake, threw away my things claiming they were old or taking up space, and moved my mom's pictures into storage without asking. When I tried to take them back out, she told me coldly, "It's time to let go of the past." Whenever Dad called, she made sure to sit close and say things like, "Ava's been a little distant lately," or, "I think she's struggling to adjust." I could hear the fake concern in her voice. She wanted him to think I was ungrateful. It worked. He started asking if everything was okay between us, and I'd always say yes because I didn't want to cause problems. At school, I started noticing small things too. My teachers mentioned missed forms I never saw. My favorite necklace vanished. She even told our neighbors I was moody and disrespectful, just to build a story that made me look bad. It hurt, but I told myself I could handle it. I tried to stay out of her way, keep my head down, and wait for Dad to come home. But then one night, everything changed. I had come downstairs to get a glass of water. The house was dark except for the faint light coming from the kitchen. I heard Linda's voice, low and serious. At first, I thought she was talking to Dad, but the tone was too sharp. I stayed by the doorway, hidden, and listened. "She won't be a problem for long," she whispered. I froze. My heart started racing. I didn't hear the rest because my hands were trembling too hard to stay still. I quietly walked back upstairs and locked my door. I couldn't sleep that night. Her words kept replaying in my head, and every time I tried to convince myself I misheard, her voice came back clearer. The next morning, she acted completely normal. She made pancakes, smiled, and asked how I slept. I just stared at her, wondering what she had meant. That fake kindness felt heavier now, like poison covered in sugar. I started watching her closely after that. I noticed how she kept certain bottles hidden in a drawer, how she locked her bedroom door even during the day, and how she always smiled a little too wide when Dad mentioned his next trip. That was when I realized it. She didn't just dislike me. She wanted me gone. And the worst part was, I had no idea how far she'd go to make that happen. That evening started off quietly, almost too quietly. Linda had been in a good mood all day, humming while cleaning, even complimenting me on how I folded the laundry. That alone made me suspicious. She wasn't the type to compliment me on anything. Then, just before dinner, she called me downstairs with a bright tone I hadn't heard in months. "I made your favorite tonight," she said as I walked into the kitchen. The smell of creamy pasta filled the air. It was the same dish my mom used to make, which made my chest tighten. Linda never cooked for me, not once. She usually just told me to make something myself or ordered food. So her sudden effort felt strange, like something she was forcing. She set the table beautifully, candles, napkins folded neatly, everything placed perfectly. She looked proud of herself, and for a moment, I wondered if maybe she was trying to make peace. I wanted to believe that. I really did. She brought over 2 plates, both steaming and covered in sauce. Then she poured 2 glasses of juice. Mine had a faint fizz on top, which I thought was odd. She smiled at me warmly and said, "You've been so good lately, Ava. I thought we should have a nice dinner together." I thanked her, trying to sound natural, but something in my gut twisted. She sat across from me, watching closely as I picked up my fork. Her eyes didn't blink. It felt like she was studying me, waiting for something. When she turned her back for a second to grab a spoon, I looked down at my drink. The juice was a little cloudy, like something hadn't mixed properly. I leaned closer and saw a faint powder swirling near the bottom, slowly dissolving. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't call anyone, couldn't leave without raising suspicion. I needed to stay calm. I placed my fork down and tried to smile when she turned back around. "Everything okay?" she asked sweetly. "Yeah," I said, forcing a grin. "It looks amazing." She sat down again, still watching me. I pretended to take a sip, but didn't actually drink. Every second felt longer than the last. She started talking about Dad, how proud he'd be if he saw us getting along. Her voice was smooth, but it didn't feel real. Inside, I was panicking, wondering what she had mixed into my drink. Sleep medicine? Something worse? I couldn't show fear. So I nodded and laughed at her small jokes, waiting for a moment to think. Then I remembered something my mom used to say. Evil always exposes itself if you're patient enough. I held on to that thought like a lifeline. When Linda got up again to check the oven, I glanced at her plate. Same food, same drink. That's when an idea quietly formed in my head. I didn't act yet. Not then. But in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. Something was terribly wrong, and I needed to stay one step ahead. Linda came back to the table with a wide smile, holding both plates in her hand. She set one in front of me and one in front of herself. "You deserve something special tonight," she said softly, like she really meant it. Her tone was gentle, but I could feel the tension hiding underneath. I forced a small smile and nodded, pretending not to notice how closely she watched my every move. I picked up my fork, but my palms were sweaty. My heartbeat was so loud I could barely hear her talking. She asked how school was, but I couldn't focus. All I could think about was that cloudy drink and the powder I'd seen earlier. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. Then she looked away for a moment to grab the napkins she had forgotten on the counter. That was when my chance came. I bent down, pretending to tie my shoelace under the table, and with one quick move, I switched our plates. My fingers trembled, but I did it smoothly enough that nothing clattered or spilled. When I sat back up, she turned around with a smile, completely unaware. I took a deep breath and tried to act normal. "It smells great," I said, twirling some pasta around my fork. She smiled wider, watching me as she picked up her own fork. The silence between us stretched long and strained. "Go on," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Take a bite." I nodded and lifted my fork to my mouth, but only pretended to eat. I let the pasta fall back onto the plate, keeping my eyes on her. Then, to my surprise, she took a bite from her plate, the one that used to be mine. The moment her fork hit her tongue, something inside me froze. I waited, unsure of what would happen. She chewed slowly, watching me, maybe waiting for me to do the same. I gave her a faint smile and said, "You should eat too. You worked hard on it." She nodded, trying to keep her usual confidence, but I noticed the first small flicker of discomfort cross her face. She wiped her lips with the napkin and reached for her water. Her hand shook slightly, though she tried to hide it. A few more seconds passed. The air in the room felt heavy, like the walls were holding their breath with me. I sat there, pretending to eat, while she pushed her plate slightly away. Her eyes darted to mine, confusion beginning to show. "What's wrong?" I asked softly, tilting my head. She blinked, her voice uneven. "Nothing, maybe it's just the sauce. A little too salty." But I could see the color draining from her face. The confidence, the fake warmth, it all slipped away. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression calm. Inside, my heart was pounding harder than ever. She had no idea what had just happened. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in months, I wasn't the one afraid. She was. It only took a few minutes before Linda's expression started to change. She tried to keep talking, pretending everything was normal, but her voice cracked in the middle of a sentence. Her hand went to her stomach, and she winced slightly. I didn't move. I just watched her, pretending to be confused. She took another sip of water and blinked fast, like she was trying to steady herself. Her breathing became uneven. The color in her face drained away until she looked almost gray. I could hear her mumbling something under her breath, words I couldn't fully catch. The room went quiet except for the faint clinking of her glass on the table. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice calm. I don't know," she stammered, pressing her hand harder against her stomach. "Something's wrong. I feel dizzy." She stood up too quickly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. She stumbled a little, grabbing the edge of the table to steady herself. Her eyes darted toward me like she was searching for answers, but I just sat there. The panic started to show on her face. She moved toward the sink, muttering, "What's happening to me?" over and over. Her breathing got heavier, her hands shaking as she tried to hold herself up. I could see the sweat forming on her forehead. I didn't rush to help her. I didn't even flinch. I stayed still, watching quietly, letting every second pass. My heart was pounding, but not out of fear. It was something else. A strange calm washed over me as I realized what was happening. Linda turned toward me, her eyes wide, confusion and fear mixing in her face. "Ava, what did you do?" Her voice cracked when she said my name. For a moment, I saw the mask fall completely. The confident, controlling woman who ran the house now looked small and weak. I slowly stood up, pushing my chair back. The sound echoed in the quiet kitchen. I took a step toward her and said softly, "You tell me you made it." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked down at the food, then back at me, realization spreading across her face. She understood now. She'd eaten what she meant for me. She leaned against the counter, breathing heavily, still trying to make sense of it. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing more to say. For the first time, she didn't have control. She couldn't twist my words or make me feel small. She couldn't hide behind fake kindness. All she had left was the truth, and it was finally staring her in the face. I walked past her, steady and silent. I didn't look back. I just went upstairs, leaving her there with her own actions. In that moment, I didn't feel angry or proud, just empty. But deep inside, I knew one thing for sure. She would never see me as weak again. Dad came home late that night, tired from his trip, carrying his suitcase and talking on the phone. He didn't expect to walk into chaos. The first thing he saw was Linda sitting on the couch, pale and shaking. Her hair was messy, and her eyes were red from crying. The food on the table was still there, half-eaten, the whole house filled with the faint smell of the dinner she'd made. "Ava," he called out, dropping his bag. "What's going on?" Before I could answer, Linda started sobbing loudly. "Robert, she tried to poison me," she cried, pointing straight at me. "She switched the plates. She tried to kill me." I just stood there calm. My hands were steady, even though my heart was racing. I'd already expected this. She was good at playing the victim, she'd always been. Dad rushed to her side, confused, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "Poison you? What are you talking about?" he asked, looking from her to me. Linda grabbed his arm, her voice shaky but dramatic. "I was trying to do something nice. I cooked dinner for us, and she must have put something in it. I could have died." Dad looked at me, searching for answers. "Ava," he said quietly. I took a deep breath and told him everything, slowly, clearly, without emotion. I told him about the phone call I overheard, about how she'd been acting when he was away, how she'd been spreading lies, and how I saw her pour powder into my drink. I explained how I only switched the plates after realizing what she'd done. Linda interrupted me, yelling, "She's lying," but her voice cracked and she couldn't hold his gaze. Dad didn't speak right away. He looked between us, his face pale, eyes wide, like he didn't know who to believe. I didn't blame him. It was a lot to take in. Then I said quietly, "If you don't believe me, check her purse." He frowned. "Why?" "Because that's where she hides the bottle," I said. "The same one she used tonight." He hesitated, then turned toward her bag sitting by the counter. Linda stood up quickly. "Don't touch that," she shouted, but it was too late. He opened it and started looking through. A few seconds later, he pulled out a small brown bottle, the kind used for prescription pills. The label was half torn, but the words were clear enough: sleeping medication. "Take one before bed." The bottle was almost empty. Dad just stared at it, his hand shaking slightly. "Linda," he said softly, "what is this?" She tried to talk, but her voice broke into sobs. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted her to respect me. He stepped back, speechless. For a long time, no one said a word. The truth hung in the air, heavy and cold. I didn't need to explain anything more. Everything was already out there. The lies, the danger, and the betrayal. Dad finally saw her for who she really was. After Dad found the bottle, everything moved fast. He didn't say much that night, just told Linda to sit down and wait while he called the police. She begged him not to, crying and swearing that it was all a misunderstanding, but he didn't listen. For the first time, his voice was cold. I could tell his trust had already broken. When the police arrived, Linda tried to keep up her act. She told them she had been poisoned, that I was lying to cover myself. But when they asked to test the food, her drink, and the bottle from her purse, her confidence started to fade. They collected everything carefully and took her statement while I gave mine. I told them the same story I had told Dad, how she poured something into my drink, how I switched the plates, and what happened after. A few days later, the test results came back. The powder was confirmed to be a high-dose sleep medication, strong enough to knock someone out for hours, maybe even cause serious harm if mixed with food. When the officer told Dad, he just sat there silently, his face pale. He didn't look angry. He just looked broken. Linda couldn't keep up the lies anymore. When they questioned her again, she finally broke down. She confessed through tears, saying she never meant to kill me. She just wanted me out of the way. She said she was tired of living in my mom's shadow, tired of my dad comparing us without realizing. She blamed jealousy, saying Dad always loved me more, that he would never see her as enough while I was around. Hearing her say that didn't even make me angry. It just made me realize how deep her bitterness had gone. All those fake smiles, all that pretending, it had all been covering something ugly and twisted inside her. Dad was devastated. He couldn't believe the woman he had trusted had done something so cruel, not just to me, but to our family. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. The next morning, he packed a small bag for her and called her lawyer. Within a week, he filed for divorce. Linda moved out quietly, escorted by an officer. She didn't look at me as she left. Maybe she couldn't. Dad didn't say anything either, just stood by the doorway watching her go. The silence between us felt heavy, but it was the kind that didn't need words. That night, I found him sitting alone in the living room. His eyes were red, and his hands were shaking as he held an old photo of Mom. I sat beside him without saying anything. He finally whispered, "I should have protected you." I didn't blame him. I just leaned on his shoulder, and for the first time in months, the house felt safe again, quiet, but safe. Linda's lies were gone, and the truth had finally set both of us free. The weeks after Linda left were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. The house felt cold, like something heavy was still hanging in the air. Every corner reminded me of what had happened. The kitchen where she smiled while trying to hurt me, the living room where my dad stood in shock, the table where I almost took that first bite. It was like the whole house carried the memory of that night. Dad tried his best to make things normal again. He cooked breakfast, asked how school was, even bought me a new phone, thinking maybe it would make me smile. But I couldn't. Every time he looked at me with guilt in his eyes, I saw the same question forming in my head. How did he not see it? How could he live beside her, trust her, and never notice what she was doing to me? I wanted to forgive him, but it wasn't that simple. I knew he didn't mean for any of this to happen, yet part of me still felt abandoned. All those times I tried to tell him she wasn't who she seemed, he brushed it off, told me to give her time. And giving her time nearly cost me everything. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying that dinner over and over again. What if I hadn't noticed the powder? What if I'd taken that first bite without thinking? The thought made my chest tighten. I kept hearing her voice whispering, "You deserve something special tonight," and it would send chills through me. Dad noticed I wasn't sleeping well. Sometimes, he'd knock softly on my door just to check on me. I'd pretend I was fine because I didn't want him to feel worse than he already did. But deep down, I knew things between us had changed. There was love, yes, but the trust we once had wasn't the same anymore. The house itself felt different too. It used to be full of warmth, music, laughter, the smell of Dad's coffee in the morning. Now it felt empty. Even the light coming through the windows looked dimmer. It wasn't just the absence of Linda. It was the loss of what we both believed was real. Sometimes I'd find Dad sitting in the living room, staring into nothing, like he was trapped in his own guilt. I wanted to tell him I didn't hate him, but the words wouldn't come out. We both carried our pain in silence. As days passed, I started to spend more time outside, walking, reading at the park, just trying to breathe without feeling the walls closing in. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a reminder. Even though the danger was gone, the fear still lingered. I didn't know how to move on yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never let myself ignore my instincts again. They had saved my life once, and I wasn't going to forget that. A year later, I was in a new place, far from that house and everything that happened in it. College life kept me busy, and for the first time in a long while, I felt free. I had my own room, my own choices, and no one watching me with hidden hate behind a fake smile. Still, some nights, when things got quiet, the memories returned like faint echoes. The sound of a plate being set down or the smell of creamy pasta could pull me right back to that dinner table. I often thought about Linda, wondering if she ever thought about me too. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate takes energy, and I was tired of carrying that weight. I had already lived through her lies, her jealousy, and her cruelty. That was enough punishment for her. I knew she lost everything that gave her comfort: my father's trust, her home, her reputation. Life had a way of serving justice without me lifting another finger. One night, while finishing some homework, I opened my journal and started to write. The words came easily. Evil doesn't always come with claws. Sometimes it wears your mother's perfume. That line stayed with me. It was the truth I had learned the hardest way. The people who mean you harm don't always shout or show their intentions. Sometimes they smile, hug you, and tell you they love you while planning your fall. I didn't write about the pain anymore. I wrote about growth, about how something dark can still lead you toward your own light. I didn't take joy in what happened to her. I took strength in surviving it. What she meant to destroy in me only made me stronger, sharper, and more careful about who I trust. My father and I still spoke, though not as often as before. There were still wounds that needed time, but there was understanding too. He had learned his lesson, and so had I. Sometimes when he called, his voice carried a quiet sadness. I knew he blamed himself, but I always reminded him that we both made it through, and that was enough. Every now and then I sit down to eat, and I remember that night, the plate, the powder, the moment I switched our meal. Not with fear anymore, but with pride. It reminds me that strength doesn't always come from fighting back. Sometimes it comes from staying calm, thinking fast, and standing your ground when everything inside you wants to break. That night changed me forever. It taught me that peace isn't found in revenge. It's found in knowing you survived what was meant to destroy you. Linda lost her comfort. I found my peace. And every time I take that first bite of any meal, I do it as someone who took her power back and never gave it away again.